I'm Duncan Burbridge, and I'm the studio manager of the Third Floor's London office. And I sort of set up the office, the Third Floor's London studio, about just under 3 years ago, as a joint venture with Framestore, who I was a VFX producer with at the time. So, you know, I've sort of built the company up from a very, well, just 4 of us in an office, in a closet, up to a team of about 40 at the moment. So it's it's going really well. The biggest challenge and the exciting thing about this project for us was at the very start, the studio, being Warner Brothers, brought everyone together and said, we want to find a way of streamlining this process so that what we're seeing in the Previs has a very real connection to what is being finally delivered in visual effects. And, you know, I think they were conscious of the previous 300 and how that process went, and they wanted to explore this way of having nothing throw away, that, you know, everything was informing each other, everyone was working together towards that common goal, no data was being lost. And of course, in doing so, saving some money, you know, because they're not having to pay people to redo things. So that was a real challenge, and it's becoming a prominent thing these days in conversations with a lot of films. And, you know, it required each of the main groups on that production, you know, us being one, to sit down around a table and say, how do we do this? Not everyone's pipelines are compatible. Not everyone's method of working is the same. You know, certain creatives are going to want certain influence or in part of the decision on certain things. How does everyone talk together to make this film? And then we sort of moved into, Previs, just very much in the traditional sense. But we were using Scanline's wave technology to help simulate the water effects for the film. So whatever we were doing in Previs with the water, they could extract that information, and down the road in post, they could see exactly what kind of wave and setup we were looking at and what was used to derive the director's intent and the shoot. They could recreate that in post, because that was their process. So that was a really exciting thing for us. You know, we've never had that sort of technology. We're not a technology company at Third Floor. You know, we're very much a content company. So, you know, being able to look at and share resources and tools with other companies to help their process, I think is extremely exciting. And so that was you know, the real crux, I think, of, and a lot to do with the presentation we gave here at FMX, is how that process happened and the results and the successes of that. Traditionally, and the same with Third Floor, Previs is very lightweight in terms of tool sets and software. So we use a lot of off-the-shelf software. You know, so we're Maya-based. We're using Adobe suite of software for After Effects and Premiere and things like that. And we've built tools that integrate into those, so we can get those two to talk, and we can extract certain data out of Maya that we feel we need. But the key thing with any Previs company is about speed, as you were saying. You know, it's about you've got a director walking in 10 minutes and he wants to see shots. And so you can't layer up a very, inflexible pipeline with a Previs artist, because then something might slow them down. If the render farm goes down, or there's some problem, or a texture doesn't load, you've got nothing to show. So it's really a lightweight system of getting out this fast, iterative versions of shots. But of course, within that, we're always looking at ways to expedite that. You know, I was chatting to one of my artists recently, and he'd said, a technology person once said to him, tell me what you do more than once, because guaranteed I can write a tool to make that easier for you. And it's that kind of thing. What can we do to get the results out quicker and better as well? I think every film has constraints. You know, there's a degree of there's a budget limitation, or there's a technology limitation, whatever it is. And I think the one thing we tend to do is have a conversation with the main key players on a production, usually from the very start. Something I like to do when we sit down to discuss the film for the first time is, you know, what are you trying to achieve here? You know, what's the goal? And, you know, because you could go completely outlandish. You could actually put a bunch of artists together with a director in a room, and they could come up with something completely amazing that's impractical, or the production couldn't shoot. But that's not how we work, because I think it's a key thing, I think, with Previs. It's a cardinal sin, if you like, for us to do something that cannot be achieved. You know, the whole idea is that we're communicating that intent, that vision, so that each of the other departments get a better understanding of what that director's trying to achieve. And everyone has to play into that and buy into that. And I think some of the best productions for us are ones where, yes, it's a director's tool first and foremost, but it's also a production tool. So when you've got the stunt coordinators, you've got the production designers, you've got the cameraman all coming in the room to look at the viz and comment on it and say, I can't shoot that, could you slow that down? Or we don't use that lens, or whatever the situation is. That informs us even more. We refine that even more into something that is achievable, that everyone does buy into. And there's absolutely an element of budget constraints. So usually what happens is you're allowed to sort of give a little bit of a sandbox environment and come up with some stuff with the director. And then usually at some point the producer will sit and weigh in, sometimes more than, or less or more than others. But generally there's always a process where they'll look at it and go, that's too expensive, or we're not going to be able to shoot that. But then that's just an additional stage of our process to go, okay, well, what can we do? Well, let's refine that. Okay, we can't do 15 shots of this. Let's figure out a really cool way to make that work in 5 shots. Whatever the situation is, I think it's always that kind of taking on the challenges that are presented to the production and working with them to find solutions, and then having it presentable in a very visual way so that you could sit down with a team and a whole head of departments and go, we know exactly what we're going to go out and shoot that day because we can see it. I think in the first instance, I think Previs is growing, and that visual bar is being set a little bit higher. Or certainly the detail we're putting into the Previs is increasing, but a lot of that's coming through demand. I mean, it used to be you could do very simple Previs with stick figures moving across a room, but that was great for a certain purpose, but it would sometimes just throw you out of the movie. Whereas what we're trying to do is, particularly at third floor, is have anyone watching our Previs just fall into what they're seeing. There's an element of suspension of disbelief in watching what we do, and I think there's always needs to be a degree of that so people don't get fixated. Oh, the lighting is going to be that. Well, not necessarily, but it's a proxy of what we think the director is going for. Because you still want the lighting people and the director of photography to come in and go, I'm not even going to pay attention to that, I'm going to do this, because that's their talent, that's what they're great for. The last thing we want to do is stop them from doing their best work. Bring them into the Previs room and help us, create even better would be a great thing as well. But I think there is an element of expectation that we're showing more things to help solve those problems, and a lot of it has come because of the pitch viz type of work that we do. That's where I think the real visual fidelity levels I think are a little higher than traditional Previs, because Previs, when you're just on a show, you're just trying to execute and just have a very rough version, if you like, of what the director is trying to achieve. And sometimes that could be stills, it could be blocking, sometimes it's fully animated. When you get to pitch viz, this is a director trying to sell their idea to the studio, so they care an awful lot about that visual presentation. And so they want those details and they want that attention, and making sure that, okay, yeah, we know we need to suspend disbelief, but we want them to focus on the right things in that process. But I think that's an educational thing on our part as well, is you can find people just steering off in a certain course, but you're like, hang on a second, no, we just want to make sure that the composition's working, the editorial choices are correct, is the story being told correctly, let's not focus on the performance of something our animator or motion capture guys have done, because an actor's going to completely add something magical to that element. So I think it's an educational thing as well, but I do find a lot of people get it now. I think that's the key thing I'm finding more and more. You don't need to, you can show something to someone, they understand what it is they're seeing, and tend not to allude to those extra details that you kind of don't want them to focus on. There's always that element to it, but you get that with storyboards as well. And actually I think what is interesting that comes up a lot is that, a traditional film, they go down a path and they'll shoot stuff, and then invariably the studio will get to see it at some point and go, okay, we're not happy with these elements, and and I've been on situations in post-production where it's a nightmare, because everyone's chasing their tails trying to figure out what works, what they do have that they can use to affect resolve those issues that the studios might have, whereas we can kind of help mitigate that much earlier, so you can see everyone in a room and go, I have a bit of a problem here, or this actually works really well, and it can just adjust accordingly. And actually I think that's an art of some of our supervisors, is trying to balance all those influences, because certainly we've done productions where the director's not the only voice in the room, and you have to try and mitigate between those two people and groups to try and make sure everyone comes out happy with what you end up with. I think it's just a really great venue. It's a great chance to get together with a lot of fellow industry people and sit around a table and talk about our industry and how things are going, and get really excited about the future, because I think it's an extremely fascinating, exciting time in our industry. There's a lot of change afoot, a lot of new technology coming into play, and seeing the results of that, and seeing new challenges coming up in films, and everyone working together to try and solve them, and then coming together again and to look at how those solutions played out and try to figure out, hey, what can we take from that? What can we learn from that would really help this next process and that next film? And I was chatting at dinner with someone last night, and they were saying one of their favourite things is you'll get all these different groups of people from all over the world and all different industries and all different companies. Sometimes we're competitors even, in a general sense, but we're all sitting around talking about what's going on and how, what experiences we've had and what changes afoot and how we can all help each other and work together to make the industry bigger and stronger. And I think that is an extremely exciting thing, and it's a great venue for it.